Okay, so you had an assignment on stratigraphy last week, so let's go over what I thought the right answers were, and also what I hope you get out of the assignment. Okay, so you were looking at two locations. Let's look at the first location. In the first location, as I already mentioned, you had an asphalt walkway and a concrete walkway. The asphalt did not run under the concrete. The concrete did not run under the asphalt. They met up against each other. But what you can see from here, and this is when archaeologists would try and notice in an archaeological site, is this is the remains of concrete that had been cut. Right? That is, you can see the jagged edges. And at least from what it appears here, if something is cut, it means that it used to extend more over this way. And that means that they cut into the concrete in order to lay down the asphalt up next to it. So according to this, we would say that the concrete is older, or came first, was laid down first, and the asphalt was laid down later. How much? We can't tell, but that is how relative dating and stratigraphy works. We could tell that something is older or younger, but not necessarily by how much. Okay, then the second example, you had two concrete walkways that abutted each other. Now, when you looked at it, you saw that these blocks were finished, right, in this shape. They were designed to be in this shape, and then they were beveled at the edges. There's no cutting of this walkway. So what that means is that this walkway came first, and then they built this walkway at an angle, and they built it specifically to fit right up against this pre-existing walkway. So this main walkway is older. This walkway over to the side is younger. Right? And it's interesting when you look at the Grand Valley campus through time. Our building that we've had the lab, we had our nut site lab right there. Lake Michigan Hall is, I think, the oldest building on campus. The other lake buildings came next, right? And you can see here's Lake Michigan Hall right here. This is really early. The professor who started the anthropology department at Grand Valley, Richard Flanders, originally his office was in a garage, supposedly. And yeah, you can see how things change. So over time, they built that large walkway to connect to the other buildings, and then they built walkways off the sides to connect to some of the newer buildings. Okay, let's look at that question I gave you about a site called Tietrich. We're going to be talking about Tietrich because it's kind of an interesting site. I know a little bit about it. It's in Turkey. And when the archaeologists, well, you could see here this main mound. What the archaeologists decided to do, they were interested in a particular time period, and that period happens to be the early Bronze Age. Now, there was all sorts of material later than the early Bronze Age on the mound. So in order to get down to the early Bronze Age, it would take quite a while to dig through the tell. So what they actually did is it turns out that in the early Bronze Age, this site was pretty large, and there were many people living outside of the tell, just around it. So they decided to dig, as you can see, horizontal excavations. These buildings are right below the surface, dating to the early Bronze Age. They decided to dig right off of the tell in these neighborhoods. That means that, no, they're not going to get large buildings like temples, because those are probably on the tell, or palaces or things like that, but they will get neighborhoods where, we could say the middle class or the, ordinary citizens lived. So what they found is when they started to dig these houses and they dug below the walls of the houses, they as we're going to talk more about, when you excavate, you document, and then you pull up things to get at what's below it. And so when they pulled up some of these walls, what they saw is that part of the street lay under the walls. That means that the streets were laid out first, and the houses were built later. Now, what can we deduce from that? Well, if the streets are all laid out first, rather than they're building houses and then they're building streets to connect those houses, it means that there was a plan, a central plan. Right? That is, there was a plan already to lay out the streets in a certain configuration and then build the houses next to those streets. So the archaeologists who dug this site believe that this site shows very early central planning. Right? And one of the articles called it the Levittown on the Euphrates. Levittown was a early suburb, early planned, we call the subdivision today, after World War II. That was in New Jersey. This is Levittown here. So it was all planned out in one episode. So it looks like with this site, during the early Bronze Age, the site grew very, very quickly. The leaders, in order to adapt to all these people coming in and wanting to live in the city, planned out communities and had these communities built. Right? So this was not a community that slowly developed over time. It looks like this was all planned. So what this shows is just from a little bit of information from stratigraphy, you can actually answer a larger question, a question related to the development of complex societies in this area. Right? And so you can see that, stratigraphy for the most part answers very simple questions. What came earlier? What came later? But sometimes the stratigraphy can actually allow you to answer really, really big questions. So again, I like to try and relate all of this back to larger issues. Okay, well, let's look at some of the other questions on. Okay, so you had this stratigraphy problem. So some of the levels you can debate which is early, which is later, based on the information here, because there's not enough necessarily information to tell which is early and which is later for some of them. But let's look at it. So most likely the wall came first. Well, obviously the wall came first. After the building was abandoned, this rubble and fill came in. So this would be second in terms of order from earliest to latest. Obviously as an archaeologist, you're digging all of this backwards. So you have to try and figure out what's youngest, remove that first. Okay, then probably the surface was laid down. The wall might have been cut into the surface, and then it looks like the floor was laid up against the wall. So I would say the surface, then the wall, then the floor. And you could say debris on either side might be the same time period, post-abandonment of the building. Then a little bit of fill came in here, and then this disturbed layer, and then a pit was cut into it, and then that was buried by the surface layer. So the pit has to be later or younger than 8 and 10. Okay, well, let's look at this. Which ceramic vessel is the youngest, 4, 5, or 6? Well, here's 6, here's 4, and 5. You can see, even though it's a little bit deeper than 4, it's because it's part of this intrusive pit layer that's actually younger. So 5 is the youngest. Which vessel is the oldest in this situation? 1, 2, or 6? Well, 6 would be the oldest here, right? Even though, 2 is kind of almost the same height, it's still, again, from an intrusive pit. Okay, how about the burials? We have Y, we have Z, and we have W. So it would be Z, then Y, and then W. Which is older, burial Y or vessel 3? Vessel 3 would be older, right? Because you can see this pit is intrusive and dates to a higher level. Right? Okay, the cross dating. One trick to use when you're doing the cross dating is as you're making your little master sequence, if you then plug in each site into the master sequence, you'll tell if it's correct or not. If all of the sites work on the master sequence, then it's correct. If there's some sort of problem, then you have to adjust it. Right? But for the first one, for example, ARLTQM. P. Oh, I left out P here. that would be the answer. Here we go. I think I had P already. Okay. That would be the answer, and if you plug them in like TMP, you go TMP, that's correct. RLM, yep, works for that. Everything's in order. Okay, the next one was, a little tricky, but designed to make you think a little bit. Okay, so the stratigraphy gives you certain answers already, and I plugged those in. So from the stratigraphy, you know that house 1 is in level 1, or house 5 is in level 1, house 6 is in level 2, house 4 is in level 4. You also know that pit B is in level 4, and then from this stratigraphy over here, you know that E is in level 3. Okay, there are many different ways to go about this, but one thing you can do is you can first look at these houses over here. Now what you see is that 3 is above 4. If there's only one house per level, then 3 has to be in level 3. Right? Okay. Then this only leaves 2 more levels and only 2 more houses. So through process of elimination, we can figure out which house goes where. Well, 2 is above 1. So 2 is younger, 1 is older. So 2 has to be here, and 1 has to be here, with level 6 being the oldest. Right? Okay, now let's look at some of the pits. All right, again, through process of elimination, what you can see is that E is above 1, C is above 1, right? D is above 2, right? Okay, so D is above 2, and you also know D is above 3, right? Because you can see over here, it overlaps 3. It's above 3, right? So that means that pit D is above 3. So it has to be either in level 1 or 2. However, what you see is that there is this system of canals here, and these canals go over pit C, so you know that pit C is below this final level, right? And you can see that the temple is above these canals as well, right? The canal is also bearing 6. So if the canal is above 6, right, and 5 is above the canal, and A is also above the canal, it means that A would have to be here, right? Because this is the only time period that is above 6 is level 1. So it means that A has to be associated with 5. Right? Okay. Now, when you look at, again, pit C and pit D, right, what you'll see is that, again, pit D is above level 2. The only level that's above where 2 is, right, it's above house 2, right? So we already have all of these. The only space that D could go would be here, right? So this just leaves 2 pits left. Again, we're doing sort of process of elimination. You've got F, right, and you have C. Okay, well, C and 1 can't be connected because C is it's covering level 1. 1 is older, C is younger. So C has to go here. The only thing left is F, right? Okay, so hopefully you got something close to that, but if you didn't, review it and see, make sure that you kind of understand how the process of elimination works here, and how things overlapping can give you some clues as to what's younger and what's older.